Assistant Principal Jake Morrison had a reputation for discipline that made female students at Riverside High School in Phoenix, Arizona, avoid the administrative wing entirely. For 3 years, he'd cornered girls in empty hallways, claiming dress code violations, while male students violated the same rules without consequence. But when he trapped 15-year-old Brooke Sterling in the supply closet and ripped her uniform shirt open, claiming she was asking for trouble by wearing a fitted top, he had no idea that the quiet transfer student had spent 8 years mastering Judo. What started as another case of unchecked administrative abuse would transform into a live-streamed revolution that exposed decades of systematic harassment at one of Arizona's most prestigious public schools. Stories like Brooke's happen in schools everywhere, but most never make it past whispered conversations in hallways or late-night texts between friends. Every person watching this has either witnessed something similar or knows someone who has. The only question is whether we're brave enough to acknowledge what we've seen and whether institutions are finally ready to listen when we do. The morning of October 23rd began like any other at Riverside High School, with 15-year-old Brooke Sterling arriving precisely at 7:45 a.m., clutching her worn canvas backpack and keeping her head down as she navigated the crowded hallways. She'd been at Riverside for exactly 6 weeks, since transferring from a small rural school in northern Arizona, where her grandmother had raised her after her parents died in a car accident when she was 7. Brooke had learned early that invisibility was survival. At 5 feet 2 inches, with shoulder-length auburn hair, usually pulled back in a simple ponytail, she wore the same 3 shirts in rotation, all purchased from the thrift store in downtown Phoenix. Her jeans were clean but faded, and her sneakers had been resoled twice. She didn't fit into Riverside's carefully crafted social hierarchy, where students were divided between the elite, whose parents worked in Scottsdale's tech corridor, and the working-class kids from Phoenix's expanding suburbs. What none of her classmates knew was that Brooke Sterling possessed a 3rd-degree black belt in Judo, earned through 8 years of training at a community center in Flagstaff. Her grandmother, a former military nurse, had enrolled her after Brooke came home from 2nd grade with bruises from bullies who targeted the orphan kid. The local dojo's sensei, a retired Olympic competitor named Master Chen, had taught her that Judo wasn't about aggression, it was about discipline, balance, and using an opponent's strength against them. Never strike first. Master Chen had told her countless times, but when someone attacks you, make sure they understand the consequences. Brooke had hoped those lessons would remain theoretical at Riverside High School. She was wrong. Assistant Principal Jake Morrison ruled Riverside's disciplinary system with an iron fist wrapped in administrative policy. At 42, he was a former college football player who'd never quite achieved his dreams of professional sports. Instead, he'd found his power in the hallways of high schools, where his 6'3" frame and booming voice could intimidate teenagers into submission. Morrison had been hired 5 years ago, specifically to restore order to Riverside after a series of incidents had made headlines. The school board, dominated by conservative parents from Scottsdale's wealthier neighborhoods, wanted someone who would crack down on what they called permissive attitudes that had allowed students to get out of control. What they'd really hired was a predator with official credentials. Morrison's office was located in the administrative wing's most isolated corner, deliberately positioned away from high-traffic areas. The walls were covered with certificates and photos of him in his college football uniform, creating an atmosphere of intimidation that made students uncomfortable even before conversations began. He kept a special filing cabinet locked behind his desk, filled with what he called disciplinary photographs of female students he deemed to be in violation of dress code policies. The dress code itself was Morrison's masterpiece of selective enforcement, while male students routinely wore saggy pants, wrinkled shirts, and untied shoes without consequence. Female students faced scrutiny for any clothing that Morrison deemed distracting to the learning environment. Tank tops, fitted shirts, skirts above the knee, or any clothing that Morrison claimed showed too much skin resulted in immediate trips to his office for what he called educational conversations. These conversations invariably took place behind closed doors, with Morrison photographing the violations and requiring students to stand in various positions while he documented the infractions. Over the years, dozens of girls had complained to parents, teachers, and other administrators but Morrison's careful documentation and the school board's unwavering support had protected him from serious consequences. Until Brooke Sterling arrived at Riverside High School, Brooke's first encounter with Morrison came during her second week at school. She'd been wearing a navy blue sweater that her grandmother had bought for her first day. Paired with dark jeans and her Resoled sneakers, the outfit was modest by any reasonable standard. But as she walked to her third period chemistry class, Morrison's voice boomed down the hallway behind her. "Miss Sterling, my office." Now, the command stopped conversations mid-sentence and caused other students to step aside, creating a clear path between Brooke and the assistant principal. She turned slowly, her heart racing, as she met Morrison's cold stare. "Is there a problem?" "Mr. Morrison?" she asked, her voice steady despite her nerves. "Your attire is inappropriate for a learning environment." Morrison replied loudly enough for nearby students to hear. "We need to discuss proper dress code compliance." Brooke looked down at her sweater and jeans, genuinely confused. "I don't understand what's inappropriate about my clothes." "That's exactly why we need to have a conversation," Morrison said, his tone suggesting that questioning his authority was itself a violation. "My office, 5 minutes." As Brooke gathered her books and followed Morrison down the hallway, she noticed other students watching with expressions ranging from sympathy to relief that they weren't the ones being targeted. In the 6 weeks since her arrival at Riverside, she'd observed the ecosystem of fear that Morrison had created, where students policed their own behavior to avoid becoming his next target. Morrison's office felt smaller than it actually was, cluttered with filing cabinets and dominated by his oversized desk. He gestured for Brooke to sit in the single chair positioned directly in front of his desk while he remained standing, using his height advantage to create psychological pressure. "Miss Sterling," Morrison began, pulling out a tablet and opening what appeared to be a camera application. "Riverside High School maintains strict dress code standards to ensure an environment conducive to learning. Your sweater is too tight and could be distracting to male students." Brooke blinked in surprise. "My sweater is loose-fitting. It's my grandmother's. Actually, it's probably 2 sizes too big." "Stand up," Morrison commanded. "Turn around slowly so I can document the violation properly." The request made Brooke's skin crawl, but she'd learned from 8 years of judo training to assess situations carefully before reacting. Morrison held the tablet at an angle that would capture her body from multiple positions, and she realized that this wasn't about dress code enforcement, it was about something much more sinister. "I don't feel comfortable doing that," Brooke said quietly. Morrison's expression hardened. "Miss Sterling, you seem to be confused about how authority works at this school. You can cooperate with a simple dress code documentation process, or we can discuss insubordination and defiance of school policy. Which would you prefer?" The threat was clear, and Brooke understood that Morrison was using his administrative authority to force compliance with requests that had nothing to do with education. She stood slowly and turned around once, keeping her movements minimal and her expression neutral. "Good," Morrison said, taking several photos from different angles. "Now, the sweater needs to come off so I can see what you're wearing underneath." Sometimes students layer inappropriate clothing to try to circumvent dress code policies. Brooke's training kicked in, and she recognized the moment when a situation transitioned from uncomfortable to dangerous. "No," she said firmly, "I'm not removing any clothing." Morrison's face flushed red. "Excuse me?" I said. "No. You can call my grandmother if you have concerns about my clothing, but I'm not removing anything in your office." For a moment, Morrison seemed genuinely surprised that a student had refused his request. In 5 years at Riverside, no girl had ever said no to his documentation process. His surprise quickly transformed into anger. "Miss Sterling, you're in direct violation of school policy and administrative instructions. You'll remove the sweater for documentation purposes, or you'll face suspension for insubordination." Brooke met his stare without flinching. "Then I guess you'll need to suspend me, because I'm not taking off my clothes for you." The standoff lasted 30 seconds before Morrison stepped back, realizing that Brooke's refusal had created a situation he couldn't control through his usual intimidation tactics. He made a note on his tablet and gestured toward the door. "You can go to class," he said grudgingly, "but this conversation isn't over." "Miss Sterling, Students who don't follow rules at Riverside find that their experience here becomes very difficult. As Brooke left Morrison's office, she understood that she'd made an enemy. What she didn't realize was that Morrison's documentation process was about to escalate into something that would change both of their lives forever. Over the next month, Morrison's campaign against Brooke intensified with systematic precision. He positioned himself in hallways where she walked, studying her clothes with exaggerated scrutiny and making notes on his ever-present tablet. He interrupted her classes to request that teachers send her to his office for administrative consultations that never resulted in actual violations but served to disrupt her education and mark her as a target. Other students began to notice the pattern. During lunch periods, conversations would stop when Brooke walked past tables where Morrison was conducting his informal hallway supervision. Teachers started looking uncomfortable when Morrison appeared in their classrooms, clearly recognizing that his interest in Brooke had nothing to do with legitimate disciplinary concerns. The targeting reached a new level when Morrison began recruiting student allies. Tyler Hamilton, a 17-year-old linebacker whose father served on the school board, became Morrison's unofficial enforcer among the student body. Tyler had his own reasons for disliking Brooke, as she'd scored higher than him on the PSAT, threatening his position as one of Riverside's academic standouts. She thinks she's better than everyone else, Tyler told his girlfriend, Chelsea Brooks, during lunch on a Tuesday in early November. Doesn't talk to anyone, acts like she's too good for Riverside. Morrison's just trying to teach her some respect. Chelsea, whose mother worked in the district office, nodded agreement. My mom says problem students usually transfer out after a semester. Maybe Sterling will figure out that she doesn't fit here. What neither Tyler nor Chelsea understood was that their conversations were being overheard by Destiny Rodriguez, a 15-year-old sophomore whose parents had immigrated from Mexico and who'd learned to navigate Riverside's social dynamics by staying informed about potential threats. Destiny had been watching Morrison's treatment of Brooke with growing concern, recognizing patterns that reminded her of her own experiences with discrimination. Destiny was also part of Riverside's student media program, where she developed skills in digital documentation and social media strategy. Unlike most of her classmates, she understood how to use technology to create accountability for adults who abused their power. On the morning of November 15th, Destiny made a decision that would change everything. She began carrying a small digital recording device to school, along with her regular phone equipped with apps designed to live stream video to multiple social media platforms simultaneously. If Morrison's behavior toward Brooke escalated further, she intended to document every moment. She didn't have to wait long. The confrontation began during fourth period, when Morrison's voice echoed through the PA system, requesting that Brooke Sterling report to the administrative office immediately. The announcement interrupted Miss Patricia Wong's advanced placement English class, where Brooke had been participating in a discussion about Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird and themes of institutional injustice. Miss Sterling, Miss Wong said quietly, as Brooke gathered her books, if you need support with anything, please know that you can talk to me. The comment was subtle, but Brooke understood that Miss Wong had noticed Morrison's pattern of targeting and was offering help within the constraints of her position as a teacher. Brooke nodded gratefully and headed toward the administrative wing, unaware that Destiny Rodriguez was following at a distance with her recording equipment activated. Morrison was waiting in the hallway outside his office, positioned so that students walking to their fifth period classes would witness whatever interaction he'd planned. His expression was more intense than usual, and Brooke noticed that his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Miss Sterling, Morrison announced loudly enough for passing students to hear, we need to address a serious dress code violation immediately. Brooke looked down at her outfit, a simple black t-shirt and jeans that were identical to clothing worn by dozens of other students in the hallway. What violation are you referring to? Mr. Morrison, your shirt is inappropriate, Morrison replied, stepping closer to her. It's too tight and too revealing. You need to come with me for immediate documentation and correction. My shirt is the same style and fit as shirts worn by other students, Brooke said, gesturing toward nearby classmates. I don't understand why mine specifically is problematic. Morrison's face began to redden. Miss Sterling, you don't get to decide what constitutes appropriate clothing. That's my job. and right now you're in clear violation of school policy." The exchange was beginning to draw attention from other students who slowed their movement through the hallway to observe the confrontation. Destiny Rodriguez positioned herself behind a group of taller students, her recording device capturing both audio and video of the interaction. "I'd like to call my grandmother before any documentation process," Brooke said, maintaining her calm tone despite her increasing anxiety. "Absolutely not," Morrison snapped. "This is a school disciplinary matter that doesn't require parental notification. You'll come with me now, or you'll face immediate suspension for defiance." Brooke realized that Morrison was escalating the situation deliberately, possibly because her previous refusal to comply had threatened his authority in front of other students. She also understood that she was facing a choice between submitting to his inappropriate demands or accepting punishment for standing up for herself. "I'm not refusing to cooperate with legitimate school policies," Brooke said carefully. "I'm asking for clarification about what specific violation you're claiming and requesting that my grandmother be present for any documentation process involving my clothing." Morrison stepped even closer, now standing less than 2 feet from Brooke and using his height advantage to create physical intimidation. "Miss Sterling, you're going to learn today that Riverside High School has standards, and students who don't meet those standards face consequences." He grabbed Brooke's arm just above the elbow, his grip tight enough to leave marks. "We're going to my office right now, and you're going to cooperate with the documentation process whether you like it or not." The physical contact crossed a line that Morrison had been careful to avoid in previous encounters. Up until this moment, his harassment had been psychological and procedural, but the decision to physically grab Brooke transformed the situation into assault. "Let go of my arm," Brooke said firmly, her voice carrying the confidence that came from years of judo training. "You don't give orders here," Morrison replied, tightening his grip and beginning to pull her toward his office. "You follow them." That's when Brooke noticed that the hallway around them had gone completely silent. Students who'd been rushing to class had stopped to watch the confrontation, their phones out and recording. Morrison, focused on asserting his dominance over Brooke, seemed unaware that his behavior was being documented by dozens of witnesses. Destiny Rodriguez had positioned herself for optimal recording angles and was live streaming the interaction to Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok simultaneously. Her captions read, "Assistant Principal Morrison assaulting female student at Riverside High. This is happening right now." Morrison began pulling Brooke toward his office, but she planted her feet and used basic judo principles to resist his attempts to move her. Her training had taught her how to maintain balance and leverage even when facing opponents much larger than herself. "I said let go of my arm," Brooke repeated, her voice now carrying a warning that Morrison was too arrogant to recognize. "You'll do what I tell you to do," Morrison snarled, now using both hands to grab Brooke's shirt and pull her toward his office. "And right now, I'm telling you that this inappropriate clothing is coming off for documentation whether you cooperate or not." The threat to forcibly remove her clothing was the final escalation that transformed Morrison from a harassment-prone administrator into a sexual predator. As he grabbed the front of her t-shirt with both hands and began to pull, Brooke made a decision that would change both of their lives. Her judo training kicked in with muscle memory, developed over 8 years of practice. As Morrison pulled forward on her shirt, ripping the fabric and exposing her bra to the hallway full of students, Brooke stepped into his attack, grabbed his lapels, and executed a perfect Ippon Seoi Nagaya shoulder throw that used Morrison's own forward momentum against him. The technique was flawless. Morrison's 240-pound frame went airborne for a moment that felt suspended in time before he crashed into the hallway's trophy case with a sound that echoed through the corridor like breaking frame. Glass, trophies, plaque, and photographs of Riverside's athletic achievements scattered across the floor as Morrison lay unconscious among the debris. The hallway erupted in shocked gasps and excited shouting as students processed what they'd just witnessed. Destiny Rodriguez continued live streaming, her video now showing Morrison unconscious, surrounded by broken glass and twisted metal, while Brooke stood over him, her torn shirt clutched closed with one hand. "Holy shit," Tyler Hamilton whispered, his phone recording the aftermath. She just destroyed Morrison. Within seconds, the live stream had dozens of viewers, and the numbers were climbing exponentially as students shared the video across every social media platform available. Comments began flooding in from viewers both inside and outside Riverside High School, with many expressing shock at Morrison's behavior and support for Brooke's self-defense. Principal Sarah Martinez arrived within minutes. Accompanied by the school's security officer and the nurse, the administrative team had been alerted by teachers who'd seen the live stream and understood that the situation required immediate damage control. Everyone back to class immediately, Principal Martinez announced as she surveyed the destruction. This area is closed pending investigation. Morrison was beginning to regain consciousness, groaning as he tried to sit up among the broken trophy case debris. The nurse knelt beside him to assess his injuries while Principal Martinez turned her attention to Brooke, who remained standing exactly where she'd been when Morrison hit the ground. "Miss Sterling," Principal Martinez said carefully, "are you injured?" "No, ma'am," Brooke replied, her voice steady despite her torn shirt and the adrenaline coursing through her system. "But I'd like to call my grandmother now." Principal Martinez nodded, recognizing that the situation had moved far beyond routine school discipline. "Of course, Officer Wilson will escort you to the main office where you can make your call." As Brooke walked away from the scene, accompanied by the security officer, she caught sight of Destiny Rodriguez still filming. Their eyes met for a moment, and Destiny gave her a small nod of support before continuing to document the aftermath. What neither of them realized was that the live stream had now reached over 10,000 viewers and was being shared across social media platforms faster than school administrators could track. The hashtag number Riverside High was beginning to trend locally, and news outlets were starting to pick up the story. Morrison was eventually helped to his feet, sporting a concussion and cuts from the broken glass, but his physical injuries would prove to be minor compared to the career-ending damage that was about to unfold. As he was led to the nurse's office for treatment, students continued filming and posting videos of the destruction he'd caused through his own predatory behavior. In the main office, Brooke sat in a chair while Principal Martinez attempted to control the situation. Phone calls were being made to the district office, the school board, and crisis management consultants as administrators realized that Morrison's behavior and its consequences were about to become a public relations nightmare of unprecedented scope. Brooke's grandmother, Eleanor Sterling, arrived at the school 45 minutes after receiving the call. At 73, she was a retired Army nurse who'd served 2 tours in Vietnam and had no patience for authority figures who abused their power. When Principal Martinez attempted to explain the situation in euphemistic terms that minimized Morrison's behavior, Eleanor cut her off. "Are you telling me that a grown man ripped my granddaughter's shirt off in front of other students?" Eleanor asked, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded field hospitals under combat conditions. "The situation is complicated," Principal Martinez replied diplomatically. "We're still investigating exactly what happened. The situation is simple," Eleanor said firmly. "Either my granddaughter was sexually assaulted by your assistant principal, or she wasn't. Which is it?" Before Principal Martinez could respond, Officer Wilson knocked on the office door and entered with a tablet showing the live stream that was still broadcasting to thousands of viewers. The video clearly showed Morrison grabbing Brooke, ripping her shirt, and being thrown into the trophy case as a direct result of his own aggressive actions. "Ma'am," Officer Wilson said to Principal Martinez, "we have a problem. This video is going viral, and we're getting calls from news stations asking for comment." Eleanor Sterling looked at the video footage and then at her granddaughter, who was sitting quietly with her torn shirt held closed. Years of military experience had taught Eleanor to recognize when situations required decisive action rather than diplomatic negotiation. "Principal Martinez," Eleanor said calmly, "you have exactly 24 hours to terminate that man's employment and file criminal charges for sexual assault. If you don't, I'll be contacting every news outlet in Arizona, along with the FBI's Civil Rights Division and the Department of Education's Title IX office." "Mrs. Sterling, I understand you're upset, but I'm not upset," Eleanor interrupted. "I'm giving you a chance to do the right thing before this becomes a federal case." Clock starts now. As Eleanor and Brooke left the main office to head home, neither of them realized that the live stream had now reached over 50,000 viewers and was being picked up by national news outlets. Morrison's attack on Brooke had been captured in high definition from multiple angles, and the evidence was spreading across the internet faster than any damage control efforts could contain it. The story was about to explode beyond the boundaries of Riverside High School, transforming a local incident of administrative abuse into a national conversation about power, privilege, and the courage required to fight back against institutional predators. But that was just the beginning. By 6 p.m. that evening, the hashtag number Riverside High had exploded across social media platforms with over 2 million views. Destiny Rodriguez's livestream had been shared by major news outlets, civil rights organizations, and celebrities who'd discovered the footage through viral reposting chains. The video showed Assistant Principal Jake Morrison's assault on Brooke Sterling with crystal clarity, leaving no room for alternative interpretations or administrative spin. Eleanor Sterling sat in her modest Phoenix apartment, watching her granddaughter's story dominate the evening news on 3 different channels. CNN had picked up the footage. Fox News was running segments about school safety, and local Arizona stations were camping outside Riverside High School, demanding interviews with district administrators. "Brooke," Eleanor said gently, "you need to understand what's happening here. This isn't just about you and Morrison anymore. This is about every girl who's been afraid to speak up." Brooke nodded, still processing the surreal experience of seeing herself on national television. The torn shirt from Morrison's attack hung in her closet as evidence, while her phone buzzed constantly with friend requests from strangers offering support and sharing their own stories of harassment. "Grandma," Brooke said quietly, "I just wanted him to stop grabbing me. I didn't mean for all this to happen. Sometimes the right thing creates bigger consequences than we expect." Eleanor replied, "Your judo instructor always taught you that technique reveals character. Well, today, your character revealed Morrison's true nature to the world." At 8 p.m., Principal Sarah Martinez's phone rang for the 100th time since the incident. This call, however, came from Dr. Richard Hawkins, the district superintendent, whose voice carried the strain of someone whose career was hanging by a thread. "Sarah, we have a federal problem." "Dr." Hawkins said without preamble. "The Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights called 20 minutes ago. They're opening a formal investigation into Title IX violations at Riverside. The FBI's Public Corruption Unit wants to interview Morrison tomorrow morning." Principal Martinez felt her stomach drop. "What are our options?" "Morrison is finished." "Doctor," Hawkins replied bluntly, "the school board held an emergency meeting an hour ago. He's terminated effective immediately. And we're cooperating fully with all investigations. The question now is whether we can contain the damage to the rest of the district. What about Brooke Sterling? The girl is a hero. Sarah, she defended herself against a sexual predator and exposed systematic abuse that we should have stopped years ago. Our job now is to make sure she feels supported while we figure out how to rebuild trust with our community." As administrators scrambled to control the crisis, Brooke's story was inspiring action far beyond Arizona's borders. At Northwestern University's journalism school, Professor Amanda Chen assigned her students to investigate similar cases at their own high schools. At the University of Southern California, the student government passed a resolution calling for federal oversight of administrative discipline policies in public schools. Meanwhile, Destiny Rodriguez had become an overnight sensation in digital activism circles. Her decision to livestream Morrison's attack had created a real-time documentation of institutional abuse that couldn't be denied, covered up, or explained away by administrative double-talk. Destiny, her mother, Maria Rodriguez, said over dinner that evening, "What you did today was incredibly brave, but also incredibly dangerous. You understand that, right?" "Mom, I've been watching Morrison target girls for 2 years." Destiny replied, "Nobody believed the complaints because he was smart about how he documented everything. But when he attacked Brooke in front of everyone, I knew this was our chance to expose him." Maria nodded slowly. She'd immigrated from Mexico as a teenager and understood the courage required to challenge authority figures who seemed untouchable. "Just promise me you'll be careful. People with power don't give it up easily." Thursday morning brought a media circus to Riverside High School. News vans lined the parking lot while reporters interviewed students about their experiences with Morrison's dress code enforcement. What they discovered painted a picture of systematic harassment that had been normalized over years of administrative protection. He made girls turn around in front of him. 17-year-old Jessica Park told a CNN reporter, "He took pictures of us and made comments about our bodies. Everyone knew it was wrong. But he was the assistant principal. Who were we supposed to report him to?" Another student, 16-year-old Maria Santos, revealed that Morrison had a reputation among female students for conducting inspections that involved inappropriate touching disguised as uniform adjustments. "We warned each other to avoid being alone with him," she said. "But if he called you to his office, you had to go." By 10 a.m., Riverside's main office was flooded with calls from parents demanding answers. The school board announced an emergency public meeting for 7 p.m., while district attorneys worked frantically to assess legal liability for years of complaints that had been dismissed or ignored. At 11 a.m., FBI Special Agent Patricia Williams arrived at Riverside to interview students and collect evidence from Morrison's office. What she found exceeded even federal investigators' expectations for institutional abuse cases. Morrison's locked filing cabinet contained hundreds of photographs of female students in various stages of undress, organized by name and date with detailed notes about dress code violations. His computer revealed search histories focused on teenage girls and communications with other administrators discussing strategies for avoiding accountability when parents complained. "This isn't just harassment," Agent Williams told her supervisor over the phone. "This is a systematic operation designed to sexualize and exploit minors under the guise of educational discipline. We're looking at federal charges for civil rights violations, possession of exploitative images, and conspiracy to deprive minors of constitutional protections." By noon, Jake Morrison had been arrested at his Phoenix home and charged with assault, sexual harassment, and federal civil rights violations. His mugshot, showing a man who looked significantly less imposing than the intimidating administrator who'd terrorized female students, was broadcast across social media platforms alongside footage of his attack on Brooke. The national response to Morrison's arrest exceeded all expectations. Within hours, the hashtag number Believe students had joined number Riverside High as trending topics, with verified accounts from celebrities, politicians, and civil rights leaders sharing Brooke's story. Academy Award-winning actress Jennifer Lawrence tweeted, "This brave girl did what institutions failed to do for years. She stopped a predator." Every school administrator should watch this video and ask themselves, whose side are we really on? Senator Elizabeth Warren's office announced plans to introduce federal legislation requiring mandatory reporting systems for educational harassment complaints, citing Morrison's case as evidence that current oversight was inadequate. "When students have to use martial arts to stop sexual predators in schools, we've failed as a society," Warren stated during a press conference. The response wasn't universally supportive. Conservative commentators questioned whether Brooke's physical response was proportionate, arguing that Morrison's behavior, while inappropriate, didn't justify violence. These criticisms were quickly overwhelmed by counter-arguments from legal experts, who pointed out that Morrison's actions constituted sexual assault and that Brooke's response was legally justified self-defense. Most significantly, principals and superintendents from over 200 school districts reached out to Riverside, requesting detailed information about implementing similar oversight reforms. The ripple effect was creating proactive change rather than reactive damage control. The contrast between Morrison's pathetic appearance in handcuffs and his previous position of authority created a powerful visual representation of how institutional power could protect predators until technology and courage combined. To expose them, Eleanor Sterling had spent the morning fielding calls from attorneys across the country, offering to represent Brooke in civil lawsuits against the school district. By 2 p.m., she'd selected Sarah Kim, a Los Angeles-based civil rights lawyer who specialized in educational institutional abuse cases. Mrs. Sterling, Sarah Kim explained during their video conference, "This case has the potential to create nationwide precedent for how schools handle administrative harassment, but that also means Brooke will be under intense scrutiny for months or possibly years." "What does that mean for her education?" Eleanor asked. "Several private schools have already offered full scholarships," Kim replied. "Elite prep schools want to be associated with her courage. But staying at Riverside and helping implement reforms might create more meaningful change for other students. Brooke, listening to the conversation from across the room, spoke up. "I want to stay at Riverside. Other girls shouldn't have to transfer to escape harassment. The school should be safe for everyone." Her decision surprised many observers who assumed she'd want to escape the publicity and start fresh elsewhere. But Brooke's choice to remain at Riverside sent a powerful message about accountability and institutional change that resonated with activists nationwide. Thursday, evening school board meeting drew over 300 community members to discuss Morrison's termination and the systematic reforms needed to prevent future abuse. The meeting, broadcast live on local television and streamed online, became a public forum for victims to share stories that had been suppressed for years. "My daughter reported Morrison's inappropriate behavior in 2021, testified Robert Chen, father of a former Riverside student. "The administration told us it was a misunderstanding and that filing a formal complaint would hurt her chances of college recommendations. We kept quiet. And I've regretted that decision every day since." Another parent, Linda Washington, revealed that her daughter had transferred to a different school specifically to escape Morrison's harassment. "The guidance counselor told us that Morrison was old school in his approach to discipline, but that challenging him would create problems for our family. How many girls have been sacrificed to protect this man's reputation?" Dr. Hawkins, facing potential termination himself for enabling Morrison's behavior, announced comprehensive reforms that would be implemented immediately. All administrative discipline meetings would require 2 staff members present, security cameras would be installed in all administrative offices, and an independent ombudsman would be hired to investigate harassment complaints. "We failed our students," Dr. Hawkins admitted publicly. Specifically, "We failed our female students by allowing a predator to operate under the protection of institutional authority. These reforms are not just policy changes, they're acknowledgments that we must earn back the trust we've betrayed." By Friday morning, Brooke's story had inspired similar investigations at schools across Arizona and neighboring states. Social media campaigns encouraged students to report administrative harassment using the hashtag number #SchoolsAccountable, while civil rights organizations offered legal support for victims ready to come forward. The viral nature of Morrison's downfall had created what sociologists called a revelation cascadia moment, when institutional abuse that had been hidden or normalized suddenly became visible and unacceptable to the broader community. Dr. Amanda Foster, a researcher at Stanford University who studied institutional abuse patterns, explained the phenomenon to NPR. "Brooke Sterling's judo throw didn't just physically defeat her attacker, it shattered the psychological barrier that had protected systematic harassment. When students see that predators can face real consequences, they find courage to speak up about their own experiences." On Monday morning, November 21st, Brooke returned to Riverside High School for the first time since the incident. The hallway where Morrison had attacked her had been completely renovated, with the broken trophy case replaced by a display celebrating academic achievements rather than athletic dominance. Students who had previously ignored or avoided Brooke now approached her with expressions of support and gratitude. Jessica Park, who had testified about Morrison's harassment at the school board meeting, gave Brooke a handwritten note that read, "Thank you for being brave enough to fight back. You saved all of us." More importantly, female students throughout the school were reporting a fundamental shift in the culture of fear that Morrison had created. Girls walked through hallways with confidence rather than caution, participated in class discussions without worrying about attracting unwanted attention, and began reporting minor harassment incidents that they previously would have endured in silence. The new assistant principal, Dr. Patricia Morales, was a former middle school principal with a master's degree in educational equity and a reputation for creating inclusive learning environments. Her first official act was meeting with student representatives to establish transparent communication channels and accountability systems. Students should never fear reporting inappropriate behavior by staff members. Dr. Morales announced at a school assembly, "Your safety and dignity are not negotiable, regardless of who might be making you uncomfortable." By December, the broader impact of Brooke's story had reached the halls of Congress, Representative Lisa Garcia of Arizona's 7th District invited Brooke to testify before the House Subcommittee on Civil Rights and Human Services about institutional harassment in educational settings. What happened to you at Riverside High School reflects systematic problems throughout American education. Representative Garcia explained during their preliminary meeting, your courage in fighting back, and the technology that documented it, created an opportunity to address these issues at the federal level. Brooke's testimony, delivered in a calm, clear voice that belied her 15 years, focused on the importance of believing students when they report harassment and creating systems that protect victims rather than institutions. Assistant Principal Morrison attacked me because he thought his authority made him untouchable. Brooke told the congressional panel he was wrong about his authority, but he was right about institutional protection. For years, students reported his behavior and were ignored, dismissed, or punished for speaking up. Change only happened when the evidence became impossible to deny. Her testimony was viewed online by over 5 million people and cited in federal legislation requiring schools to implement independent oversight systems for harassment complaints. By spring, Morrison had pled guilty to federal civil rights violations and been sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. The plea agreement included detailed admissions about his systematic targeting of female students and the administrative culture that had enabled his behavior. Riverside High School had been transformed from an institution that protected predators into a model for student safety and administrative accountability. The reforms implemented after Morrison's exposure were studied by education researchers and adopted by school districts nationwide. Brooke Sterling, meanwhile, had evolved from a quiet transfer student into a reluctant but powerful advocate for educational justice. Her decision to stay at Riverside and help implement changes rather than transfer to an elite private school had created lasting impact for students who didn't have the option of escaping problematic institutions. On the 1-year anniversary of Morrison's attack, Riverside held its first annual Student Safety and Dignity Day, featuring presentations about recognizing and reporting harassment, workshops on bystander intervention, and celebrations of the courage required to challenge institutional abuse. Destiny Rodriguez, now a junior and editor of the school newspaper, organized a panel discussion featuring Brooke, several other Morrison victims who had found courage to speak publicly, and national experts on educational equity and student rights. A year ago, girls at this school were afraid to walk down certain hallways. Destiny told the assembled students and parents, "Today, we have systems in place to protect everyone, and we know that our voices matter when we speak up about injustice." Brooke's closing remarks at the event reflected the growth that had come from her decision to fight back against Morrison's attack. "I never wanted to become a symbol or an activist. I just wanted to go to school without being harassed. But sometimes defending yourself requires more than physical techniques. It requires changing the systems that enable abuse." She paused, looking out at an audience that included students from dozens of schools who had traveled to Phoenix to learn about Riverside's transformation. "What I learned from Judo is that using someone's strength against them only works if you have proper technique and timing. When institutions protect predators, they create their own vulnerabilities. Documentation, courage, and community support can turn that institutional strength into the force that destroys the abuse." The audience rose in sustained applause as Brooke finished speaking, but she remained focused on the individual faces in the crowd, students who had found their own courage to speak up, administrators who had committed to meaningful change, and parents who were demanding accountability from educational institutions. Later that evening, as the commemorative event concluded and visitors departed, Brooke walked through the renovated hallway where Morrison had attacked her. The space looked completely different, but more importantly, it felt different. Students moved through the area with confidence and comfort, engaging in normal teenage conversations without the undercurrent of fear that had characterized Morrison's era. Eleanor Sterling, now 74 and prouder of her granddaughter than she'd ever imagined possible, joined Brooke for the walk through the school. "Do you ever regret staying here instead of taking one of those private school scholarships?" Eleanor asked. Brooke considered the question seriously before responding. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would be like if I'd just transferred and tried to forget about Morrison. But then I see girls like Jessica and Maria walking confidently through school, knowing they're safe and supported. and I know we made the right choice. Your judo instructor would be proud. Eleanor said, you used your training not just to defend yourself, but to protect others. As they reached the main entrance, Brooke noticed a new plaque that had been installed beside the school's mission statement. It read, "In honor of students who find courage to speak truth to power and create safer communities for everyone." The plaque didn't mention her name, which was exactly how Brooke preferred it. The goal had never been personal recognition, it had been creating change that would protect other students from experiencing what she'd endured. 2 years later, Brooke Sterling graduated from Riverside High School as valedictorian, having earned a full scholarship to Stanford University, where she planned to study education policy and civil rights law. Her graduation speech focused on the relationship between individual courage and institutional change, themes that had emerged from her experience with Morrison but applied to challenges throughout American society. Change happens when ordinary people refuse to accept extraordinary injustice. She told her graduating class, sometimes that refusal takes the form of physical self-defense, sometimes it's speaking up when others stay silent, sometimes it's documenting truth when institutions prefer lies. But change always requires someone willing to take the first step, even when they can't see where the path leads. The speech was recorded and shared widely on social media, where it inspired new generations of students to recognize their own power, to challenge institutional abuse, and create safer educational environments. Jake Morrison remained in federal prison, where he would serve the remainder of his 4-year sentence as a registered sex offender whose case had become a landmark example of how technology could expose institutional predators who had previously operated with impunity. Destiny Rodriguez graduated a year after Brooke and accepted a journalism scholarship to Northwestern University, where she continued documenting social justice issues with the same courage and technical skill that had exposed Morrison's abuse. Riverside High School became a model for educational institutions nationwide, demonstrating that meaningful reform was possible when communities demanded accountability and students found courage to challenge abuse. Most importantly, hundreds of girls who attended Riverside during and after Morrison's tenure completed their education without experiencing the harassment and intimidation that had characterized the school's culture for years before Brooke Sterling decided to fight back. Her judo throw had lasted 3 seconds, but its impact would protect students for generations to come. In the end, the shy girl who just wanted to attend school safely had become a catalyst for transforming American education's approach to institutional abuse. And every time a student found courage to report harassment, every time an administrator prioritized student safety over institutional reputation, and every time a predator faced real consequences for abusing their power, Brooke Sterling's moment of courage echoed through another school hallway, making education safer for everyone. The lesson was simple but powerful. Sometimes the smallest person in the room possesses the strength to create the biggest change, especially when that strength is combined with courage, documentation, and community support. Morrison's career was over, but Brooke's impact on American education was just beginning. Brooke Sterling's story reminds us that institutional change often begins with individual courage, when students, teachers, and parents work together to demand accountability. Even the most entrenched systems of abuse can be transformed. Her legacy lives on in safer schools across America, where predators can no longer hide behind administrative authority and students know their voices matter.